And I just want to ask, starting out, I know you grew up in the Audubon Park area in a huge, well, really big family, 14 kids, right? And I mean, how did your early years really contribute towards maybe directing you towards broadcasting?
I got to do goofy things like this, like light up my face like it's Halloween. Hello, nice to see you. Yeah, you had to sort of manufacture your own little world because I was one of 14 kids. And otherwise, it'd have been like being in the army, living in a barracks where everybody's the same and we're all doing the same things all the time. So there's a lot of creativity among all of my siblings because everybody just had to like peel back some layers and find out who they were.
Yeah, and I know you went to St. X, go Tigers, right?
Go Tigers.
Right. And yep, St. X. And so did anyone there or like some sort of class or something have an influence on you towards going into radio?
A bunch of people did. Joe Crow and Ted Pierce and Joe Heitzman were three guys who were all funny and encouraged creativity. But then I had some brothers who were pretty amazing too, and were like even in the computer lab as brother Malcolm then. But he knew that I was not really like zoned into that linear stuff that you need in computers. So he just sort of let me find my way in creative ways. And then Roger Brown was in art. And so obviously that was an easy one because he saw, creativity and just kind of let me do my, just get my creativity, but out on a canvas. And I didn't really know much about that, but he was a good teacher because he just said, just express yourself. There's no limits here. Just do your thing. And so there were a lot of people. Believe it or not, my French teacher, Helen Wimberg, a lot of people were intimidated by her, but I loved her. I thought she was great. I learned enough French. Je m'appelle Terry Miners. Work on the radio WHAS on Louisville, Kentucky, les États-Unis. So I still remember some of that stuff. And Irene Rapier was an English teacher who was phenomenal. And then I just had football coaches that were good teachers. The Glazer brothers. I think Mike came in later, but Bill was my geometry teacher. And we just had some good, encouraging people. And obviously, there's law and order at St. X, but they still see at the root that you have something that makes you unique, and they want you to plant that seed and let it grow. And that's what's great about St. X.
Yeah, Mike Glazer taught me English.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean he's still going 40 plus years. It's
for
quite
him.
yeah. And so college decisions. Did you make your college decision based on radio and that sort of thing?
I did because it was mostly about getting away from my parents. Again, we go back to the 14 kids. It's so loud and you don't have any privacy and you don't there's so many limitations on what you can do when you're living on a three stack bunk bed, which I was. And there, one brother on the top, I'm in the middle, another brother on the pull-out bed on the bottom, and then right across from us, another three stacks. There's six boys in that room. So that kind of crowds your creativity and limits what life can be like. So that's a challenge. But again, the outlet was using my creative talents at St. X, and then I decided, well, if I go to Kentucky, I'm just far enough away that I can come home if they need something, but I'm kind of living my own life without somebody coming in and actually snapping off the bedroom light when I'm not ready to go to bed yet. It was nice, a bit of freedom to just be down the road 65 miles.
And in college, I know you worked for WKQQ, right? And did you at that point did you want to be talking on radio, or are you more
Uh,
of a technical guy?
no, I was more of a production guy, and I had learned a little bit hanging around Wacky Radio, which is now 790, and we own it. iHeartRadio owns it. It's right down the hall from me. But that's where I started nosing around when I was at St. X, and they let me hang around, and guys taught me how to run the tape machines and get on a mic and do audio effects, zooms and reverbs and all this stuff, and you kind of learn the basics. So then when I went to college, I put together an audition tape showing them the things that I knew how to do, and I got hired at that station. But my job was really to go in there on Friday and Saturday nights when the kids were out having a good time in college. I went in there and it was automated. My job was just to make sure it didn't go off the air. You had to switch out these tapes when one was getting near the end. You'd switch it out and then play a different one while you were changing it and then get back on. And it was automated. It would go from here to here to here to here. And I had to make sure that those reels stayed full. And then my friends would come over in college, like college boys will do, and they're coming over to the radio station where I'm not supposed to have guests. And then they're like, "What's this do?" And I say, "Don't touch that," you know. But they didn't care if they were going to mess me up. But I'm just like, just do not touch anything in this building.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so stressful. That sounds so,
And
man.
then they went live the next year and they put a bunch of people on. They hired a bunch of people to do live shows. And then one of them didn't work out. And then somebody pointed at me and said, "Why don't you try it?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And the first time I got on the air, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, uh, here's the time is changing from 2 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And here's Led Zeppelin, and that's all I would know how to do. And then my friends would just die laughing. They're like, "You're terrible. You stink. You say every other word. They're gonna fire you tomorrow." And here it is, 45 years later.
What like stations like that, where do they get the funding from to really get that going?
Commercials. That's the thing of commercial radio. That's how they make it. A public radio station gets some government dollars, and they have loyal listener support, people who donate. But a commercial radio station, you have to have people who go out and sell commercials to the little hamburger stand, to the gas station, to Walmart, to whatever it happens to be, the Kentucky Lottery. If they get them to buy commercials, and then there are rating surveys that show how many thousands of people are listening to the station, and so they base the rates on all that. But ultimately, you're good to go if you have sponsors, and I've been really lucky over the years.
So from there, you worked your way to WLRS, if I'm not mistaken. And how'd you end up there?
I got tired of the Lexington station and thought, I don't want to do this. So I went up to Indianapolis because my brother had bought a grocery store, small grocery store. And it was one of those corner marts that people pull in and buy gas and beer and cigarettes and all the other things they shouldn't have. And so I went up and ran it for about 2 weeks and thought I was miserable. So I started calling people back in Louisville instead of Lexington and said, "You looking for somebody? I mean, I'll do anything. I know this. I know how to do production and I'm this or that or whatever." And so WLRS hired me. And I said, "I don't want to be on the air anymore. I did that for several years in Lexington, but it's boring. So I don't want to do it." But then, the evening person would call in sick and they go, "Terry, get in there." And then all of a sudden I'm on LRS playing records in the evening. And then a guy left the morning show team and they liked me. So they put me on with him, and his name was Ron Clay. The other guy left for HAS, and we were a big hit. It worked out great.
Now I know from there you two switched to another station. I've heard there's quite the story around that. So how did that sort of happen?
A new rock station came to town and they couldn't beat us in the mornings. We were killing it. We were called Morning Sickness on WLRS, and we were just bouncing jokes off each other. We didn't really know each other that well, but I was the preppy St. X boy and he was the jaded hippie. And so when you merge those personalities, it made for a lot of funny stuff. I'd wear a tie to work and they'd laugh at me because I learned that at St. X. And it just took off fast. And then cable TV put us on a local access channel so that while we were on the radio in the morning, you could watch us at home. And then we da 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 do all of our stuff on the radio, then play some music. But while the music was playing, then we turned the cameras and start doing things just for the cable TV audience. And that was a big hit. They ultimately unplugged us because a new product came out they said was going to replace us, and it was called MTV. And we said, that'll never work.
It'll never happen.
So the new rock station came to town, and then they said, they had to do something to find success in Louisville. They were doing fine in the afternoon and evening, but in the mornings we were crushing them like a bug. And so the owner of the other station called me and said, he talked like this. We called him Diamond John. Hey, Duvers. Hey, whatever you make, I'll give you, 40% raise. So
An offer. What?
me being honest, I told him exactly what I made, but I should have said
Yeah, you
$200,000.
should have.
Then I'd be making 280. But anyway, I called Ron, who was really just not, he was not the kind of person who liked any entanglement. He didn't like controversy at any time. He didn't like negotiating anything. So I just called him and I said, look, we have a guy from the other station who's promising us some really good money. And all Ron said is, what do you think? And I said, I don't know. I think this is probably a short run sort of thing for us. So we might as well milk the cow while we can. I don't have a signed contract, and nor do you. So let's go. And he's like, okay. So we meet at the Bristol on Bardstown Road with this owner. I brought a lawyer because I wanted him to make sure that all the details were correct. You just don't want somebody to take advantage of you. And so while we're sitting at the table, they put us on the table right in the front window that looks out at Bardstown Road.
I can picture it. Yeah.
Yeah, you picture that. We're sitting there, just it's the program director, the owner, the lawyer, and Ron and me, five of us at that table. All of a sudden, one of the owners of WLRS walks in.
Oh no.
And then the owner of WQMF jumped up out of his chair and goes to him and says, Hi, Lee. I think you know Ron and Terry. And he sees the paperwork on the table and he's like, oh. So we signed the deal at that table. And the new owner, the QMF owner, said, you better go down to LRS right now and get your stuff. They're going to be mad. And of course, that guy who saw us immediately went and called the other owners and said, they're stealing our morning team. And so when we got down to WLRS, one of the owners was standing in a doorway and said, I can't let you go. I'm not letting you go. We have a verbal agreement. We don't have a signed agreement, but we have a verbal agreement, and we're going to go to court over this. And I just said, all I want's my stuff. It's right down that hallway in that drawer. That's all I want, please. And she was pretty defiant for a while. And then finally, one of the other owners showed up and told her she had to let us have our stuff. It was, you have to let people have their personal effects. So I went in, got my stuff, and ran out. I go home. I'm living on the second floor of a duplex in the Highlands, and Ron lives over in Indiana, and it's kind of an obscure area. They couldn't find him. But a guy out in front of the house, my house, starts calling my house at 10:30 at night. He wants to serve me a subpoena, a cease and desist that he got a judge to sign. And I looked out the window, cracked through the blinds, and I see a guy down there on a phone in his car. And it was like, uh-oh. So I called the girl who lives downstairs. She's a good friend of ours. And I said, can I use your car in the morning? Come down the back stairs. We'll switch keys. You take my car to work. I'll take yours, and I'll go out the back. She goes, go, great. So we did that whole thing. At 4:30 in the morning, whatever it was, I went down the steps, got her keys, switched out, drove her car out the back way. This guy sitting in front of my house was still out there.
Oblivious.
Yeah, he didn't know because he was sitting in front of it. And I guess he thought, well, he's going to come out here in this front door because there's his car right there. And I took somebody else's car and went over there. And then Ron Clay and I did this whole, we're breaking in. We acted like it was a guerrilla warfare takeover of this station. Of course, they never found him to serve a subpoena. So we do the whole deal. We switch the station. It's all making news everywhere. Oh my God, the morning shows are switching. And we're on all the TV stations are there. Everybody's there to get us because it's newsworthy for this big hijack. And then finally, we went on at like 6 in the morning. About 8:30, 8:45, the owner said they taped a cease and desist order to the front door. So that's enough. We got it done. But all the media covered us. And then we were like big news. We were like lead story. And then we had to go to court later that day, that same day.
Same day. Wow. I mean,
And so we had to go in, and the judge said, I'm going to allow them to switch stations. However, they can't keep the name of the show, Morning Sickness, or the names of any of the sketches they do on WLRS. That's their property. So we went on QMF and started calling ourselves the show with no name because it was taken away from us. And then we invented names for all the different sketches. And it was a big hit show and funny. It was really a great thing. And then a few years later, Someone called me and said the WHAS afternoon show's coming open. I would apply for it if I were you. And that was the program director over there's way of getting somebody else to contact me. He just wanted me. And he told me, well, I immediately wrote a letter that said 84 reasons why you should hire Terry Miner. So I thought of 84 things and sent them over to him because that's the station's dial number. And the guy told me at HAS, he goes, as soon as I opened that letter, he's like, I knew I was going to hire you. So it all worked out. And then a few months later, or no, it's not even that. It was 3 weeks later. I was gone, and Ron was really mad at me, but I'd had enough of that. I felt like I had done, bathroom jokes and all that business for 4 or 5 years now with him. And it was like, all right, I'm 28 years old. I need to grow up. And so it worked out great. And I've been there ever since. I'm in my 39th year.
So I mean, recording, going on air every weekday. I mean, how do you prepare for that? Because I know I'm not equipped to prepare for all that. Like, how do you do that?
I'm just always on it. I mean, there's always something going on. I'm always constantly reading things, always prepping. And that's the only way you can be in this kind of a talk radio because there's so much time to fill. You have to know bing, 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 bing. And the worst thing can happen is when somebody else on your show says, hey, did you hear such and such? And you have to go, no, what's that? Because you missed it. Sometimes it's a dumb thing that just happened. And I'm not on Twitter while I'm on talking on the radio. So why would I know that? So that's kind of a dumb lead in. But still, that's the thing is you really have to be universally informed. Like today, I had to know what happened on the Grammys. I didn't watch it last night, but I had to know the essentials of that so that when it came up in discussion, I could talk about it. We had to talk about shooting down the Chinese balloon because that happened over the weekend. And what are the ramifications going forward? We have to talked about Louisville and Kenny Payne, the message he put out after they were close, but he put out a powerful message to the fans. It was good. And we had Calipari stuff. And so that's that. And then like tomorrow's a State of the Union address. So I will probably be on that a little bit. There'll be other things that go on. And there were a whole lot of things that I prepped for today that I didn't use that I will spill into tomorrow. So it's like an overflowing bucket and most of it's evergreen. So when it flows over, it just gets caught by the lower bucket and you just bring it up the next day. So there's always ongoing product unless it's a story that goes away, goes out of vogue. But then on like Wednesday, I know Mitch McConnell's people already contacted me today and said, hey, he's probably going to get on with you on Wednesday. Don't know for sure, but he wants to follow up on Joe Biden's State of the Union address. So I'm like, great. Here's where I'm on. And the only person I have on Wednesday show so far is Peyton Siva. So I told them the times that were available. They'll pick one. And then that's how you just kind of work on a 48-hour rolling clock.
Do you draw or do you look at Twitter mostly, or do you draw from like papers and all sorts of different things?
Twitter is the best because that's instantaneous feed. I was worried that through all that transition of the ownership that it was going to go away because it's the absolute best news feed. It's just there. Here comes things. Boom, 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 boom. You put up Tweet Deck, and you can see all those things that are going on at once. But I've got to stay focused. You know how horses wear those blinders on a race course? That comes first. It's just like when you're flying an airplane. They say no matter what happens, you spill coffee in your lap, a bird hits an engine, a plane's flying close, whatever. The first thing you do is fly the airplane. So in radio, it's the same thing. The first thing you do is host the show. Don't be consumed with other information rolling in unless it's a catastrophe. Then you have to do it in real time. But you fly the airplane first. You run the show first. And then maybe a news person will come in during a break and say, hey, this happened. We got to get on it. And then you switch the topic.
Where do you get the energy to do this too? I mean,
I just like it. I'm a happy person. I've got a great wife. I've got a great life. So, when you have a happy life, work is it's just another chapter of the joy of living. I do like it. Or there's some days where I go, oh, I wish I was playing golf. Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a natural human behavior, but I just like, the being in the arena. I think Howard Cosell said that a long time ago. You like to be in it. I'm not actually playing the sport, but I'm there to observe and report and comment on it. And so I get to do politics and I get to do sports and I get to do newsworthy items. And I interview the mayor and I interview senators and movie stars. And all kinds of people, and it's just fun, and interesting people who write books. That I talked to a guy about 10 days ago. He just put out a book, and 20 years ago, this month, he and his buddy took some kind of supplement in the morning, which they always did. They got a new shipment of something before they went to the gym, some powder thing in water, little. They go driving down the road. They're both going like, I don't feel right. I don't feel right. They pull into a Dairy Queen. His buddy sits in a booth and starts throwing up. This guy walks into the bathroom and drops dead. He's
Oh,
dead in the bathroom. And then he told the story on the radio of how he saw a body on the floor, and he's up in the corner. He's up here high, and he sees a body, but he doesn't know it's him. But he can also see his buddy out in that booth, and he sees the EMS people come get him. And he said eventually someone wanted to use the bathroom at Dairy Queen. So they're banging on the door and nobody answers, banging on the door. Finally, they go get someone. They go, there's something wrong here. They open the door and he sees the people come in. And then they go, oh my God, this guy's dead. He's cold to the touch. And the woman flips him over. And that's what he said when he's up here in this position up high. He said, that's when I realized that was me. And then from that point on, he goes on this journey with this guide that takes him into what he thinks is heaven. And he tells the whole story. And then ultimately, when he gets back and they revive him, the guy says to him, it's not time. But he shows him all these visions and all these places of learning and higher maturation and higher development of the human being. And then the guy says, it's not time for you. And the next thing he knows, he hears his brother in the hospital yelling in his ear, hey, hey. And then he slowly, and then he doesn't hear anything. And then he comes back again hours later and realizes he's in a hospital. And he says he rips all the wires off of his face and his arms, just gets up in the gown and just starts walking down the hallway and it's late at night. Nobody sees it at first, even though alarms are going off because he ripped the wires. There was, I guess, no one in the nurse's station. And he walks down, he's trying to get on the elevator. And then finally they come running for him. Hey, hey, what are you doing? And so, it's a heck of a story, but
yeah.
that's his book, The Light After Death. And I was like, wow. And so, when I get to feature something like that on the air, I think it's fascinating. I'd much rather be doing that than any of the other jobs I've had when I was a kid. You know what I mean? It's just, there's something fascinating about mining a story out of somebody's brain.
Now, after these 40 plus years, you've done a lot of impressions. What's your favorite, all-time favorite?
There are a lot of them because, and my voice is strained now because of stuff I did 30 years ago. I would play this woman character named Gertrude, but it was really screechy, like that. And it was just, but you do that too much and you're tearing up your vocal cords. So I did that for about 10 or 15 years. I did Governor Wallace Wilkinson. I did Eddie Haskell. That's from Leave It to Beaver. That's a show from a long time ago. I did Beaver Cleaver. I did Ralph Hacker, the best man on radio. I did Terry Truxton, the country music DJ, and all these different characters over the years and wove them into whatever the current stories were. But Wallace Wilkinson, the former governor, God rest his soul, he's gone. He's already had his moment of floating up and seeing himself on the floor of the Dairy Queen. He was not a fan.
Oh yeah.
And then because I really made him out to be a huckster. And when he
I know how
died,
this story ends. Yeah.
when he died, he owed 400 something million in a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
And so it turned out Terry was right. But I took a lot of lip over that for years. And then, of course, I loved Howard Schnellenberger, who was great to me right to the end. And he got it. He understood the parody. I would do this and I'd run it through a harmonizer to drive that voice down. And Schnellenberger ate it up. He was U of L's football coach. Although one time he didn't understand what had happened. He came in to do his coach's show one night. And I was finishing my radio show and he looked me right in the eye and he goes, come here. And we went out in the hallway and he got right in my face. He said, did you say I was cheating on my wife? And I was like, what? I didn't know what he was talking about. And so my mind starts spinning. What is he talking about? Well, the sketch we had done the last week was essentially this. Schnellenberger and Bill Olson, who was the athletic director at U of L back then, Bill Olson's having a conversation with fake Schnellenberger, and I'm both of those voices. Well, Howard, like that. And then, and he'd say, we need you to get more involved in the community. We want you to be a philanthropist. And Schnellenberger says, you want me to cheat on my wife? And he says, no, that's philanderer. We need you to give away some of your money. And he stops and he goes, you got any other ideas? So I explained that to Schnellenberger, real Schnellenberger, in the hallway. And he looked at me for a minute. He goes, okay. And then he walked. I didn't know if he's going to knock my teeth out or what. But that's where some idiot listening didn't tell the story right and said, Terry Miner said you were cheating on your wife. No, no, he didn't. It was a sketch. So you got to be careful what you're doing in comedy.
So you were talking about Mitch McConnell earlier, and all these people that you've interviewed. Who's been your favorite guest?
There are a lot of them. Like I said, the dude on the phone about dying, I mean, that's pretty powerful. But I've talked to some amazing people who do incredible things to help others. I mean, I talked to a guy last year. He went to the Bears game and he held up a sign on TV that said, I need a kidney, and gave a phone number. He lives over in New Albany or Jeffersonville. And he didn't get a strike off of that. But a reporter called him a week or so later and said, hey, we're going to do a story on you on that thing, just your trip to Soldier Field, and you showed up on national TV and somebody took your picture and then it was on Facebook or something. And it got shared a lot. And she put the story on TV, and then boom, somebody saw it and then connected, and he's got a kidney. And so a few months ago, my wife and I were at U of L game. We were just standing there on the, whatever it's called now. It was called Brown Williamson. It's got a new name now. Angel's Envy spot. And we're just standing there looking up at one of the big screens. And this guy walks up to me and he goes, I'm the guy that got the kidney. And I'm like, whoa, hey, because I hadn't met him before, So we then exchanged phone numbers, and then he came back in the radio to update people. And I love that kind of stuff. Years ago, they just talked about it again, the 1994 gigantic snow, 16 inches of snow. There was a little girl who needed some sort of organ transplant, but we had to get her somewhere. We had all this snow, and they could take her from the airport because that was cleared, but they couldn't get her out of the neighborhood wherever she was, I think in Heights Point. So we just got on the radio and said, we need people to come with shovels and go to this field. And they did. And I mean, it just chokes me up every time I think about it. All these people just coming out of their homes. They cleared this field and the helicopter landed, took her, saved her life. Who doesn't love that story?
That's amazing. Yeah. And then I got a couple more questions.
Sure.
Let's see. So is there any person in particular that you just haven't gotten the chance to interview, but you want to interview?
I wanted to talk to Barack Obama. I kept questions for him in my backpack, just in case it ever happened. You just never know when someone's going to contact you. Joe Biden was here years ago when he was a senator, and he walked in, and we actually argued about taxes or something. But I just happened to have read something. Again, preparation's everything. Mm-hmm. Had the papers in my backpack that showed who pays what in America. And he started saying something. I said, well, that isn't true, Senator. And then I pulled out this thing and said, here's the facts. Ding, 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 ding. This is from Forbes yesterday or whatever. I just happen to have it. And, that kind of stuff's fun. I mean, I've talked to Hillary a couple times. I got to meet George W. Bush, but it wasn't on the air. I met him downtown. He was at an event. Somebody got me up close. And so my parents were with me, and they were thrilled. So, that's fun. I like, Jennifer Lawrence. I've known since she was a teenager. She's hilarious. I got to interview Charlton Heston, Planet of the Apes. And he was in a lot of famous movies, but he was also the president of the NRA. So he was fascinating. And his life story book is thicker than War and Peace. And the book didn't come until the day before the interview. And so I was like, there's no way I can get through this thing. So just like in my good St. X days, I'm like, just stuffing in as much as I could. And I asked him a few questions during the interview, and he said, great question. No one's ever asked me that before. I was like, You don't know of the 800 pages. I only read 46. Well,
Yeah,
must have hit a good one.
I've done that before. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people who've overcome things is really something I like. But yeah, there's a lot of great athletes and some of them who are a little difficult because they're spoon fed so much how great they are. And so it's like they get some of them get a little bit of an attitude, and that's okay. They'll mature. They'll get older and realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been a jerk. But that just comes with the territory with some people because there's so many people just kissing them all the time. And here's your meal, here's your bus ticket, here's this, here's that, here's your airplane ticket, da 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 da. What else can I do for you? And he's a
Never
guy
got
who's
punched in the face for a while. That's what.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you know, that's all interesting. Athletes tend to not be that interesting, but like Peyton Stevens coming on Wednesday, but he's a grown man now. And he was actually pretty good to talk to when he was in college. He was interesting, like Russ Smith, interesting. Uh, Kentucky, you had people like Derek Anderson, great interview, even when he was in college. Cameron Mills, great interview because he gave you something. But a lot of those guys are just like, they just see a microphone, they go, get away. So it's like, okay, whatever. I was lucky enough to hang around when Pitino was in charge at Kentucky and at Louisville and the Boston Celtics. I remember when Pitino was taking the Boston Celtics deal, I was the last person in his house back there in '97. And I said, man, I don't think this is a good idea. You got it made here. You just won the championship. Derek Anderson couldn't play because he was hurt. So they just lost to Arizona in the national championship, but they were this close to winning another one. And of course, Tubby wound up winning next year with a great roster. I was just telling Pitino, they don't listen to you. You go to the pros, they make more than you do. It's not like here where you're in charge. And he's like, yeah. And then finally I leave and he goes over and announces that he's leaving, and that's when I was like, well, I tried. So my other buddy, Ron Carmichael, couldn't be there because he had knee surgery. So it was just me trying to fend off the Celtics. And Pitino was taking calls from Dave Gavitt, he was tied to Celtics too, but he was Big East commissioner. And then I think Red Auerbach called once. There were people connected to, there were Boston players calling him. And so there was no way I was going to be able to talk him out of it. So anyway, he lets Ron Carmichael and me come up to Boston that fall and sit on a bench with the Celtics. It's hilarious. Carmichael and I are sitting there right behind the Celtics. And like Antoine Walker is now a Celtic. He was on Kentucky. And then Antoine comes out of the game. Pitino pulls him out of the game. And Jim O'Brien, the assistant coach, is like, no, Twan, we need you to do this or that. And Pitino didn't even talk to him. And then Antoine didn't even listen to the assistant coach and just plopped down on a chair. And I remember thinking, I told you it was going to be like this.
Yeah.
But, that's just how it goes. It was too much money and influence for him. And he wanted to be the Boston Celtics coach and president. So he had to do it for his own, I guess, his own resume. But again, I saw where that was heading because, man, he had it made at Kentucky. But then when the Louisville thing came open, Carmichael and I were the ones who kept pestering him, take the job. He goes, no, we were calling him every day. And he goes, Michigan, we can do it. I said, at Michigan, you know what that's like. Even if you win the national championship, the next day, people are going to wake up and say, I wonder if we got any good recruits in football. They don't care. They don't care about basketball like they do in Kentucky. Take this job. And then Dick Vitale got on the radio with me later that day. And Tom Jurich told me later he was listening and loving it. Dick Vitale was saying, oh, Terry, yeah, we don't know what Rick's going to do. He's got these options in front of him here, including Michigan and then Louisville and maybe UNLV. And I said, well, Dick, you told him to take the Michigan job. He goes, oh, no, I wouldn't get involved in that. I said, yeah, you did, because Rick told me you told him to take the Michigan job. And then Vitale says, well, I didn't know this was going to be an ambush interview. I'm like, I'm just stating facts here. So anyway, Tom Jurich was laughing. He just ate it up. And of course, Pitino took the job the next day. So it all worked out great until it didn't.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I want to thank you, Terry, for calling in and recording this episode. It's been amazing. So,
all right. I hope we covered enough stuff for you.
oh yeah, I mean this is amazing. So it's been great.
Appreciate it. Are you a senior?
I am, yeah.
Congratulations. You got a lot of good buddies in that class. Because my daughter and her little group of friends all hang around with a bunch of guys, and I just get a kick out of them. St. X boys are the best, just because I like what they're offering: discipline, structure, and an outlet to do creative things, just like what you and I are doing. So great to talk to you, Jack.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Terry. We'll have to do this again and cover some more stuff. So.
Thanks, bud.